The cycle. The paradox at the heart of the Ether storyline. Some would even argue the heart and soul of the narrative. The thing that both is the plot and drives the plot. Within Trek's original zombie story, the cycle was everything, but it naturally begs a question, one which perhaps has been neglected by the zombies community. What happened before? Now, I don't want to accuse anyone of laziness on this front. This is a huge question, not least because the cycle, by definition, is a paradox. It isn't meant to have an answer bound by logic, and so if you are trying to wind back the clock to the original incident that started it all, but you are only using information from within the paradox, you won't uncover anything. You will just end up back where you started, a cycle. However, with the recent developments on the front of Dr. Monty and his true identity, and how he became the godlike entity we know him as, we may, for the first time, have access to information that predates the cycle. With this, we can actually start to try and untangle the cycle for the very first time and figure out exactly what happened. As you know, we recently finally solved the impossible Easter egg after 8 long years, revealing the true identity of Dr. Monty being once a human, a real-life figure by the name of John D. With this context in mind, we can now re-examine the plot holes within the official timeline and take a look back at the Giant and Zetsubou no Shima's radios and finally get to the bottom of their ambiguous nature. As well as, with this context in mind, we can finally properly understand why Element 115 changes from a rusty orange coloration to a blue coloration when Blundell took over from Origins onwards. For all of the answers, definitely stay tuned. This video has been a monumental effort, and the longer the research phase went on, the more things started to click into place. Suddenly, lingering questions from Black Ops 3 were answered, and I think a lot of these answers were actually presented to us in the game and within the timeline. We just didn't know what we were meant to be looking for. The strange radios from MAXIS in the Giant and Zetsubou no Shima, the snow in the Remember Forever trailer and the Giant intro, and even the colour of Element 115. But before I let you carry that hype with you into the rest of the video, I should tell you outright that there will be lots of speculation. We are almost entirely using events attested to either by the game or by the timeline, but in places, these two sources conflict. In these situations, we have had to try and logically deduce what actually happened. Often, these conflicts are due to time itself being broken, and so there may not even be any truth in the matter in some of these situations, and theoretically, both can be true. This is quite a long and heavy video, and so if you make it through all the way till the end, I've included a very special bonus. This isn't a storyline Easter egg, but it was spotted on the official timeline and is a never before seen Easter egg from the developers. So watch until the very end. Regardless, I proudly present to you the true story of the original cycle and the actual beginnings of the zombie storyline. Let's begin. The 0th cycle is what I would say, but that's actually not true. First, a cycle works better for a video title, and we are genuinely going to discuss the first cycle. But in actual fact, what you think of when you imagine the first cycle isn't that at all. It's actually what happens before the cycle existed. In effect, Cycle 0, the prequel to the first cycle. You might think I'm splitting hairs, but it's actually really crucial to understanding this, and part of the reason it's been so confusing up until this point. The cycle, as we see it in-game and in the timeline, is a closed system. There might be slight variations, but the outcome will always happen and end in a similar way. From the research we've done here, it is my belief that the cycle truly begins the moment that Origins happens. That might surprise some who assumed I would say Revelations or maybe the Great War, but there's a good reason for this and we'll get onto it later. But for an out-of-game reason it makes sense too, with, like I said, it being Blundell's first lead map taking over the narrative as a whole. Of course, he had worked on maps in the past like Der Riese, which he also made integral to the beginnings of the zombie storyline, and even Mob of the Dead is integral to the zombie storyline, as it's literally the reason the cycle can even perpetuate. Therefore, the 3 core maps, the 3 beginnings for him, are also the 3 core pillars of the zombie storyline itself. If either collapses, the zombie storyline does not hold up. But just to clarify in case anyone is still confused, what we are discussing is the events that actually predate the cycle, the original iteration of events, and how the cycle begins and then occurs over and over again. begin with, the prehistory of the universe is somewhat similar to what we already know. The Ether exists, as do the Keepers. With the summoning key, they create Agartha, a realm that is the Ether in physical form, and that connects to all the many dimensions. Some amongst them begin experimenting with the forbidden Dark Ether, which corrupts them. They construct the Ether Pyramid, and this ultimately leads to a large war. Here, I want to make another note that is likely to confuse some people who are somewhat well versed in the lore. The battle that occurs here is not the one we see depicted in Alpha Omega and tagged at Toten's cutscenes, in spite of the fact that people often use it to imply otherwise. Myself included, as it's just the best visualization we've ever gotten of a similar event. However, it literally cannot be. Why is that? Well, firstly, the Apothicons look different, which hasn't happened yet at this point in the timeline. In the beginning, there were Keepers. Some of those Keepers became corrupted, leading to a duality of an ideological split. They fought amongst themselves, but ultimately the corrupted Keepers lost, where the original Keepers banished them to the Dark Ether. Over eons, they mutated and becoming what we know now as the Apothicons, their physical forms mutating from their Keeper brethren. However, in these depictions, we can clearly see that the Apothicons are what we know of them now, and so this was not the original battle. They only mutate once they are banished to the Dark Ether. Secondly, Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man are there, and this is the first bit of speculation that we can pull in from what we've learned, that may seem almost heretical. If you've followed the recent videos, you know that based on developer documents and countless hints in game, I am now firmly convinced that Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man were 16th century mystics, John Dee and Edward Kelly respectively, before becoming their godlike counterparts, leaders of the Keepers and Apothicons. We will inevitably discuss them later too, but just keep in mind that the entities we know as Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man do not exist yet. Therefore, the scene we commonly see from these two maps is categorically not this event. With that digression out of the way, what happens next? As mentioned, the corrupted Keepers were banished. Their last act of treason was to hide the Ether Pyramid on the moon of Earth, a planet which held a gateway to Agartha, and seed Element 115 throughout time, in the hopes humanity would utilize it to free them from the Dark Ether. Above all else, they want to return to Agartha. They will continue to influence the minds and thoughts of any humans they can, though their influence is limited. What happened next? At this point, you'll be expecting me to rattle off the usual stuff about the Great War fought in the Crusades. But actually, no. I won't do that because I can't. Think about it for a second. In order for the Great War to happen, we need two things: an exceptionally large volume of 115 in northern France, and premise existing in the medieval period. Well, we currently have neither. In fact, time was still linear. There are no real instances of time travel, no paradoxes. In fact, it seems almost certain, based on clues from Dr. Monty, that there weren't even any other dimensions yet, just the original one, as he states in Gorod Krovi.
Alright, so you've got this universe, this big, changey, already volatile universe, and then you shatter it with a hammer, a metaphorical hammer, and it cracks and splinters into a million other universes, all coexisting at exactly the same time. Do you have any idea how difficult that is to keep track of? I may be omnipotent, but I can't be everywhere.
We are currently at a point where the universe has yet to be hit by that metaphorical hammer. Everything is in its proper place. History proceeds as normal. There are still fragments of 115 that reach the Earth, but nothing to the scale we would witness later in the storyline. One of the most important events was soon to take place, though, with the aforementioned John Dee and Edward Kelly. For more information on this, make sure to check out the previous videos I've made on this topic, which will be linked on screen and in the description. I have an entire playlist on the impossible Easter egg. But to give a summary, John Dee and Edward Kelly, two alchemists, mystics, and great friends, were currently in exile from England and travelling around Europe. Whilst John Dee was an honourable, if not eccentric magician, Kelly was altogether more devious. Not a bad man, but more open to making promises he might not be able to fulfill. Him and Dee regularly attempted to contact angels, and received visions from them in dreams. Dee's Seal of God was, in our storyline, the very same ritual circle we see the Apothicons employ, as well as the Pack-a-Punch Rock on Shatters of Evil. So we can only assume that, unbeknownst to these two, they were actually contacting the Apothicons themselves. Eventually Dee, likely feeling discomfort from the entities they were contacting, as he was a pious man, ventured back to England, while Kelly remained in Europe. Eventually, however, he ran into trouble with the Emperor of Austria, having promised that he would produce him gold through alchemy, something he knew in reality he could not do, and appears to have killed himself during his imprisonment. As we know from the Warden, however, the willing taking of one's own life is what allows the Apothicons to take possession of your soul, and in this moment, Kelly became the Shadow Man, the Apothicons' agent in reality, or at this point, potentially just the corrupted keepers, before they formally became the Apothicons, something that would come into play in our next steps. This matches Monty's quote, where he specifically says the Apothicons got a hold of the Shadow Man. That'll play for you now.
Now here's the thing. I knew a bloke, and I'm talking way, way, way back. He was the sweetest, most charming individual you could ever wish to meet. He was funny too. We used to have such a good old laugh together. Honestly, my sides hurt thinking about it. He was my friend. He was my best friend. And then the Apothicons got hold of him. Since then, he's pretty much acted as their agent, zipping around the galaxy. Wait, I keep changing it, don't I? Which do you prefer? Universe? Multiverse? Omni-fucking-verse? Oh, it doesn't really fucking matter, does it? Yeah, let's get on with it. Short version is, he's no longer sweet, charming, or funny. He's what brought them here, when he escaped the key.
Now is a part that most watching are probably most familiar with. The classic zombie storyline. A meteorite of element 115 crashed near the stony Tunguska River in Siberia in 1908. A few decades later, in the 1930s, the same element was discovered in Poland. Dr. Ludwig MAXIS founded Group 935 to investigate this new element and advance the human condition through its usage. Richtofen, initially working at the Illuminati's behest, joins Group 935 to steal their research. Then, the single most important event we are going to discuss occurs. Richtofen, along with Dr. Schuster, successfully manages to teleport a walnut a few feet. This seemed insignificant, MAXIS even mocking it as a waste of time and resources, but unknown to both men, they had just forever altered time and space. This is also the lore explored in Der Riese, the map that Jason Blundell led for the very first time. And he has said in interviews he intentionally tried to weave more narrative and the breadcrumbs that birthed the original storyline into this map, due to his rich love for stories. And so, this walnut idea could have even been his. At some point during this period, Maxis Diary Entry 10, study number 0804 occurs, which was also given as a radio in the Giant. From leaked developer documents, we actually know that this is internally considered Radio 1 on the Giant, and we can get into the rest of them and why they are important later on. But for now, here is this one.
Though our matter transference tests at the new site have been largely unsuccessful, the teleporter's malfunction has nonetheless yielded some interesting data. The fact that the test subjects departed their original point of origin is undeniable. What is uncertain is what became of them. Richtofen is insistent in his belief that they have been transported not through space, but through time. In the absence of empirical evidence, I myself cannot entertain such madness. I fear, Richtofen, irrationality may soon prove a liability to our endeavors.
Richtofen eventually volunteers to be the first human test subject, resulting in him teleporting through both space and time, ending up in a hidden cave upon Earth's moon. After touching the ether pyramid there, he begins to hear the many voices of the Apocalypse, most prominently the voice of their newest mercenary, the Shadow Man, now acting as a free agent of the Apothegons throughout the universe, enslaved by them to become their lord. Meanwhile, back in 1592, in John Dee's laboratory in England, temporal rifts from this event flowing back through time reach him, resulting in strange noises detectable only with the device he dubs his ethereoscope. John Dee decides to begin more experimentation in order to better discern the nature of this ether. Unknown to him at the time, his old friend had just played the opening move in an interdimensional chess game that Dee would be playing catch up to for the rest of eternity, always having to play the responding move. This is the first temporal rift. The space and time are now beginning to fracture. From here, back in the 1940s, Richtofen begins to live his double life, feigning ignorance and incompetence around MAXIS by day, while building Griffin Station with his other disgruntled colleagues by night. From here, Richtofen's grand scheme unfurls, though likely not exactly as we saw it. First and foremost, poke machines do not exist, nor do wall chalks yet, or even the Pack-a-Punch. Samantha reaches the moon and tries to take vengeance on Richtofen and his newly awakened test subjects. However, at this point, Richtofen's memory is likely significantly better than it would be within the cycle, as we know this is something that degrades the subsequent loops, with more and more temporal distortions and Element 115-induced delusions, the bleeding of their iterations, past, present and future, and always as one. With this in mind, we can consider something that always stuck out as odd in the official timeline: Shinonuma. In the official timeline, Richtofen awakens the test subjects at Der Riese, but then has to travel to the other side of the world, to the Rising Sun facility, just to recover his diary to formulate a plan. This diary contains many experimental notes, as well as information on the artifacts he will need for his grand scheme. However, the fact he needs to do this simply because he forgot is surely the result of 115-induced delusions. This is speculation, however, in all likelihood is this initial set of events. Richtofen may well have planned to go straight to the Siberian facility, Shangri-La, then the moon. Ascension can also be excluded, as the only reason that Ultimus end up there within the cycle is in order to once again recover Richtofen's diary, which is dropped upon teleportation, recovered by the Soviets during the Der Riese massacre, and eventually finds its way to the Ascension group. Again, that is pure speculation and we can't know for sure what maps did or didn't happen, but given Richtofen only needs the Vril device and a focusing stone, and he ought to know exactly where those are, he has no reason to go to Kino der Toten and Ascension. When the grand scheme reaches its crescendo, and Richtofen takes control of the ether, MAXIS feels the best way to stop him is to destroy the Earth. By doing so, he severs Richtofen's connection with the ether, though not the zombies. This also creates the massive rift in the Earth. Now, throughout Black Ops 2, we hear this phrase from Richtofen: "Mend the rift." Most people just assumed this to be referring to the colossal shattered Earth. But if we examine the timeline carefully, we can actually see it specifically tells us that he instructs them to mend the rift in space and time. This was another hint in the timeline towards this wider narrative that we missed, as the shattering of the Earth doesn't just break the continents like never before, it also breaks time. Several temporal rifts occur as a result of this colossal one. The first, which we have discussed in prior videos, is back at the turn of the 17th century with John Dee, alone in his lab one day in 1600, still trying to determine the nature of the ether. A corpse is suddenly raised, a zombie. He orders the Royal Guard to slay it, but very disturbed, he asks permission from the Queen to found the esoteric brotherhood of illuminated de-resurrectionists. But that wasn't the only result of this colossal temporal rift. Simultaneously, in 1885, the events involving Jebediah Brown, the Keepers, and the invention of the Pack-a-Punch machine occurred, the end result of which was the town being moved and displaced to a cavern in Angola, Africa. As a direct result of this, in 1942, a Group 935 archaeological dig would recover the remains of the golden Pack-a-Punch machine, with the Dr. H. Porter reconstructing it and installing one at the mainframe of the Durries facility. As a result, the past has been changed, and the Pack-a-Punch now exists in the timeline. While at first this seems like an oddly specific change, what actually happens here becomes plain to see. Monty tells us in Revelations.
In the beginning, and believe me, there was a beginning, everything was in its proper place. Time was linear, just as it should be. But a little thing called Element 115 changed all that. Especially when, what was it again? Yes, when Group 935 came along. Once they started messing around with it, they buggered everything up. 115 shouldn't even exist in your dimension. But nonetheless, here we are. Bloody teleporters.
Everything is so complicated now, Edward. Remember when the world was a simple place? No time travel, no multiverses, no paradoxes, no existential crises. It is the ether, Edward. Once it touches something, that thing is forever corrupted. The only way to halt the unraveling of space and time, which, need I remind you, we are both directly and indirectly responsible for, would be to purge Element 115 from existence before it ever encountered humanity. I believe I have uncovered why Dr. Monty will not destroy Element 115. The ether is inextricably linked with Agartha. They are one and the same. Agartha, the physical space, is constructed and exists of the ether.
Now, with the John Dee document, the "in the beginning" passage from Monty contradicts the official timeline, which says in the beginning there was just the ether, the Keepers. Among them were beings who went by many names, Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man. Monty here specifically credits the "in the beginning" to actually refer to the original fracturing of the timelines, which means that the "in the beginning" line in the official timeline is actually negating all of these events that I'm exploring in the build-up to the very first cycle. And so the timeline is not technically incorrect, it's just missing a massive passage of the storyline. As time fractures ever more, 115 is proliferated throughout time and space, its presence increasing exponentially. In the Shadows of Evil scraps, Richtofen tells us directly that 115 is the fabric, the thread holding it all together, the webbing of the universe. As such, when we consider the full events of Purgatory Point, what sets things off was a man discovering 115 within the town's mind, something that really ought to have not been there. But now, as a result of the temporal rifts from the Earth shattering, it is. If we use Richthofen's analogy, it's like the universe is fabric with a tiny loose thread, and every time we pull, the thread gets longer and longer. That is what 115 is, and thus it appeared where it shouldn't have and doomed Purgatory Point to be pulled underground. During this period between Moon and Transit, MAXIS begins to formulate his plan, which was relayed in a MAXIS diary entry. I fear that time is running out. Though my understanding of the ethereal realm remains limited, I am convinced that the manipulation of the energy fields within all matter is vital to uncovering the dimensional gateway itself. It is my sincerest hope that somewhere in the realm beyond, my beloved Samantha still lives. I can only pray that Edward's insatiable lust for power does not prove catastrophic. Interestingly, a very similar message was relayed in a radio in The Giant, with slight differences. From here, Black Ops 2's Victis maps play out as we know. Victis activate the global polarization devices in the favour of MAXIS, against the wishes of Richthofen. But now we need to discuss what happens next. The end of the beginning, so to speak. Get ready, as this is about to get really confusing. In Being buried, with all 3 towers in his favour, MAXIS is able to usurp Richtofen's control of the ether by taking advantage of the massive amounts of ethereal energy spilling out of the broken Earth. At the time during Black Ops 2, the exact nature of why this was possible was uncertain. But as we now know, the rift in the Earth is one not just in space, but time as well, it makes more sense. All the energies across time, a result of the temporal rifts, and now at MAXIS' disposal. Now, a lot of the things are about to happen simultaneously, as not only will we be dealing with time travel, but also with Agatha, where the laws of time do not apply. MAXIS gains control of the ether's energies, proudly proclaims he can now at last reach Agatha, and sentences Richtofen to an immortal existence in the body of a zombie. Entering Agatha, which exists without respect to time, he pulls Samantha's soul from the moon. At the very moment, she soul swapped with Richtofen, so that she may join him there. Now again, I want to remind you all that everything happening in this section in this video happens simultaneously. A big claim, I know, but we can prove that when all is said and done. Just stay with me for the moment. With Samantha now in Agatha, MAXIS understands the state she is in, and begins to feel a sense of regret for his decisions, as heard in The Giant.
She may have been returned to me, but I fear she is not as she was. In recent months, she has barely said a word. When she did, it was only to cry out for him, to call his name. What have I done?
With the Havoc being wrecked on space and time, back in 1608, John Dee and the Esoteric Brotherhood performed a final experiment. Time was being bent and broken like never before, and snow fell from the sky, as if reality itself had shattered open. The destruction of linear time and causality was about to be set in stone. Element 115's very colour had changed from the colour of rusted earth orange to a bright, icy blue, like the snow that now froze the River Thames over entirely. Blundell even hints that the Element 115 colour change is important by not answering it within Milo's questioning. That'll play for you now.
Does the colour of Element 115 change depending on which universe you are in?
Pass.
At this point is when John Dee gains immortality. Never officially being given the title Doctor in real life, he assigns it to himself, under a new cryptic name, Dr. Monty.
He's not even a real doctor. I would know.
The Shadow Man states he has gone by many names.
Dr. Monty is just one of the many names he's been known by.
Dead Ended says, but only one is real.
So many names, but only one is real.
It's unclear the exact event that gives him immortality. We only know it was through his esoteric experiments. Did he potentially create what we know now as a liquid divinium, liquid element 115, and drink it, and for some weird reason, it allowed him to ascend to immortality? Or were the Keepers losing the war at this current point in time, as the Apothicon/corrupted Keepers had gained the Shadow Man to help lead them, and so they needed their own leader? And who better person to pick than his once best friend, John Dee, with so much inside knowledge on who he once was and how he acts. This was the tide that inevitably led to the Keepers winning the war. The destruction of the Earth with the 115 rockets, the obliteration of all of life by MAXIS to open Agatha, the extraction of Samantha's soul from the moon, all of these events spiraled, happening independently and yet at the same time. They coalesced into a colossal temporal hammer. The universe was already beginning to separate in unnatural ways, and with one more push, it would fall, shattering the single linear universe into fractures upon fractures upon fractures of different realities, never to be repaired. And unfortunately for everyone, Samantha herself was about to give it that push, the last event to happen simultaneously with all of this chaos, the one that would begin the cycle, and the true reason for the name of one of the best maps of all time, hiding in plain sight. Time would finally be destroyed in the origins of the cycle. Maxis doing what he did was the point of no return. Now everything cascades. Samantha is confused, outside of reality, and yet within the house. Her father was old and full of hate, yet young and naive, planning to save everything. A boy she knew was with her, and yet she had never had any friends, save for her dog Fluffy. The future and the past occupied the same space within Agatha, and it was nearly too much for her. She was so confused that all she could do was run away. Reaching out across the now ever-fracturing dimensions, she found her father, different to how she remembered him, but still her father nevertheless. She found him in Dimension 63, a fractured realm of reality now so potent and filled with 115 that it takes on a wholly new past. Yes, that's right, I believe Dimension 63 is a fracture. Only the original timeline is the original timeline. All else spirals from the original. Why? Because it has to, when we take into account Monty's Gorod Crovey quote, that we are all echoes of the same being, through different points in space and time. Therefore, all versions of the characters are splinters from the very first ones, not independent from one another. They are all snowflakes in a sea of 115. The timeline saying the summoning key created all dimensions, filling them with life, contradicts Monty's metaphorical hammer quote, and him saying time was once linear. And it very much contradicts the very name original dimension. In order for it to be the original, it has to be the first in canon, not just from our perspective, and the very one all others are based on. And this makes a lot of sense with Dimension 63 specifically, with it having more 115 than the others, which is similar to the fractures. As they fracture more and more element 115 spills into said universes and contaminates them more and more. Monty said 115 was not even supposed to be in this dimension. Here, Maxis was experimenting with the massive runestones of element 115 that had been discovered in northern France, and opened a rift in space and time that allowed Samantha to reach him. In order to save her though, he would need to open a gateway, paralleling himself in the original dimension. This Maxis would record an extremely similar log to that of the diary entry, though with slight changes reflecting this new reality.
In these dark days, I find myself clinging to the belief that there may still be a way to set things right, though my understanding of the ethereal realm remains limited. I am convinced that the manipulation of the energy fields within all matter is vital to uncovering the dimensional gateway itself. It is my sincerest hope that somewhere in the realm beyond, my beloved Samantha still lives. I can only pray that Edvard will have the courage to fulfill the vow he made all those years ago.
From here, the events we see in Origins play out, with its snowfall and bright blue element 115. This is the world ice theory. Time and the fabric of reality 115 itself was frozen. 935 converted to letters spells ice, which 935 is the very date of the bell tower under Eisendrache required to do the plunger Easter egg. And when killing a Panzer soldat, it will become inflamed for a short duration that insta-kills Panzers. And if you kill zombies in the church room, by a set of newspapers, various different newspapers will display that showcase an outbreak of zombies in London. The parallels here are striking, despite some inconsistencies with when newspapers and photographs were originally able to be taken. But the connection to London here is stark, when that is the central place of John Dee's life and where he died, and where the Thames froze when the universe broke. Samantha enlisted the help of 4 heroes she felt like she knew all too well. And despite the human members of the Order of the Keepers trying their best to prevent Primus from doing so, they were successful in opening a gateway to Agatha, and sent Maxis, now a brain in a jar, through the rift. What the hell just happened? Well, I'm sure Monty said the same thing to himself at this point, so I'll let him just explain in his own words.
Where to start with this one? You guys got a mulligan after Richthofen blew up the Earth. Samantha was confused. She was still settling into her new home. Actually, she was locked away, outside of reality itself. You freeing her was a big step in the right direction. Here's the thing. You have to remember, the order in which you experience things doesn't necessarily reflect the order in which they happen. Whatever way you look at it, though, it really was the beginning of the end. Or the end MAXIS. He was the first. The vessel you constructed for him back in World War I somehow shielded him from the influence of Element 115. He opened the portal between the worlds and, well, that's where, when shit really went tits up. The world within the world got turned upside down and inside out, if you can imagine such a thing. So, anyway, it was around then that I was forced to step in.
See, when Monty describes it to us, it's like he's describing multiple things at once, and in a way, it's because he is. Think about it. Two MAXISes end up opening a gateway to Agatha, essentially simultaneously, both to free Samantha. One to free her from the moon, and one to free her from Agatha itself. The end result, two MAXISes, both trying to open a gateway to Agatha, for polar opposite reasons, no pun intended, simultaneously across a fracturing universe. To us, origins should logically happen after buried, but as Monty says, the order we experience things isn't necessarily the way they happen. If things were logical, everything should have been fine. But they weren't illogical. These things happened all at once, from Moon through to Origins. It's no wonder, really, that time shattered so catastrophically. And it's even less of a wonder that, at this point, Monty, now empowered, appears in the storyline and immediately begins his quest to try and fix everything. But there is one more thing we have to take care of first. Remember when I told you that the prehistoric civil war for Agatha amongst the Keepers was not the one that we see depicted in the Alpha Omega intro? Well, let's get into that event. First, some setup, and an answer to a long-standing enigma.
Day 66. The children are gone, and the house feels empty. I miss their laughter, their games. The sirens have not sounded for several months. I do believe that we may have turned the tide in the battle. But at what cost? The radiation levels from the fallout remain dangerously high. I can only pray I live long enough to confirm that my plan was indeed successful. And the dark presence that has haunted our dreams and infected every facet of our existence has finally been vanquished. Reality itself is shifting. I find myself reflecting on memories I am no longer sure are my own. Beyond the window, I saw a wasteland, stretching as far as the eye could see. I saw a scourge visited upon the earth. I saw the children withered before my eyes. That was before he came. Samantha has been returned to me once more. As have you, Edward. As have you. After so long in isolation, we had begun to believe that we were the only survivors of the catastrophic event that had shaped our lives. Supplies were beginning to run low, and I was forced to prepare for the worst outcome. Just as I feared that we were truly alone, just as I feared that the end was near, there was a knock at the door. You swore a promise to me, Edward. It may have been a long time ago, but I am sure you will not have forgotten. You swore to follow my instructions, to comply with my every order. You swore to enact whatever plan I conveyed to you, all in the hope that we could overcome the chaos that we ourselves had created. You have kept your word. However much it pains my heart, I owe it to you to confess. I'm sorry, Edvard. I have withheld certain truths from you. He explained everything to me. He will explain everything to you. Though his very presence defied logic, defied reason, he told me that he would help. I could not refuse. The siren has not sounded in many months. I am confused by the changing world around me. I look at my hands, and they are not the hands I remember. The wrinkles, veins, and liver spots that textured my skin have disappeared, as though time itself was unraveling against its natural order. Is this the end, or a new beginning?
MAXIS enters the house in Agatha, and there is a colossal battle outside in the wilderness where there was nothing but wasteland, though his memories are uncertain. Was it just Samantha? Or were there multiple children? When he recalls this at a later point, well into the cycle, these questions bother him. What bothers him more is that he keeps Monty's involvement to himself, away from Richtofen, until he eventually decides to share this with him. In fact, it seems like MAXIS can't actually remember anything for certain, apart from the fact a battle happened, from before Monty arrived. Given we know this must surely be after Origins and the breaking of time, let's consider what occurs. Monty, now empowered and feeling the need to step in as a result of the sorry state of the universe, begins to unite with the Keepers who, according to him, were fractured across reality from this point, similar to the main crew.
The Keepers, an ancient order who'd been granted the wisdom to see beyond the limitations of their own realm. Even while the rest of mankind scrabbled around in the dirt, drinking their own piss, the Keepers took the mantle of benevolent watchers. Like the seers and sages of the old world, they could foresee how the actions of the apothecons would lead to the destruction of life itself. The Keepers have always been here, much like your good selves. They too were scattered and fragmented across the multiverse. They may have acted erratically, but know this. Their actions were only ever concerned with the preservation of life itself. Remember what I said before about energy.
Note here, he speaks about the Keepers in third person. He does his best to unite the Keepers, fracturing across reality, and leads them into the battle before them. A new war for Agatha. Why would this occur now? Well, think about what we know from the timeline and other sources. Element 115 exists on Earth specifically to do two things. Allow the Apothecons to escape their imprisonment in the Dark Ether, and allow for the opening of Earth's gateway to Agatha. The two things are linked, and you can't have one without the other. Think back to Shadows of Evil for a minute. When we are acting in the Apothecon's interest, the Keepers go out of their way to try and stop us. Now, let's consider Origins. When we are trying to open a gateway to Agatha, what happens? The Keepers, or this time the human members of the Order, now necrotized, tasked with guarding Earth's gateway, try and stop us from powering the generators, and opening the rift. There is only one reason for this. If we open it, the Apothecons will be allowed to enter their old home. Suddenly, we have a perfect place in the timeline of events for this mystery war we saw so prominently in Black Ops 3. It wasn't the Great War, because there are no humans. It wasn't the first war for Agatha, as there are already mutated Apothecons. It is, in all likelihood, the war MAXIS describes in his radios, wherein the battle took place, causing the radiation surges. Perhaps MAXIS even took part in some capacity, constructing the tools to defeat the threat, but at great cost. The Apothecons would be banished once again, but not before they send 115 hurtling through the dimensions, fracturing them ever more, and ensuring their return. With this done, the cycle is cemented. 115 lands on Earth in 5 AD, being discovered in the Middle Ages, spawning the Great War and everything we know that follows, allowing for Origins to happen and completing the paradox. Unbeknownst to Monty, the existence of Primus and the Great War meant the cycle is now fixed. Every map we now know about is going to happen / has happened. Monty now sets to work. First and foremost, he recovers the MAXIS drone and assists him in properly reaching Agatha and gives him a new form, a physical body, causing the erasure of the previous MAXIS in the process, as we see in the Remember Forever trailer with Sam in a similar situation. Her past corrupted self is wiped, a new one takes her place. While I say erasure, it seems more likely that this is some sort of merging process, as MAXIS describes seeing his skin grow young again. Regardless though, he is distinctly now without his soul. Next he begins making his own alterations to the timeline. His old friend and now enemy, the Shadow Man, has seen to it that existence is ensnared within a sort of trap. And so he will make the best of it and ensure that he can undo this, constantly trying to one-up and stay ahead of the Shadow Man's tampering throughout the dimensions. such as in the Alcatraz Pocket dimension, or his communications through Ultimus Richtofen. Monty does this in order to create his perfect world and preserve it. Observing the cycle's events as they happen, his attention is caught by the temporal rifts produced by Ultimus travelling through time for the first time, from Der Riese to Kino der Toten. As a result, he feels the need to start making nudges to aid them, adding the chalk drawings to the walls and nudging Group 935 to create the perk drinks. Monty says the perks were originally something cooked up by Group 935, he just nudged them along here. Meaning that, in the original timeline, I have to assume Group 935 were the original creators. However, here, he sped up the process. With this new cycle progressing, it's equally likely that Monty is now poised to erase the soul of the original MAXIS from existence when the cycle reaches that point, aware of the chaos it will inevitably cause. He was unable to do this the first time around, as at this point in time, he was still just the mortal John D, but he is poised and ready for the next time. Next, Monty brings Samantha back to Agatha. Though witnessing her corruption, he sends her away again and goes with her. During this period, MAXIS is in total isolation, and so begins exploring the universe at large. He discovers the empty Earth, where another version of himself has a book of ancient origin, called the Kronorium, though it requires souls in order to be accessed, and he is uncertain at what point another version of himself created this base and found and stored this book. This other version of himself is seemingly the MAXIS from the Argonia Fracture, which I have a video linked in the description explaining this more in depth. Back at the house, Monty returns, having formulated his grand plan. A true attempt to fix everything and put things right, purging the Apothecans from reality, with Element 115 going along with it. In order to do so, however, they will need to enlist the help of souls who have arrived past the severe fracturing of the universe, and take the souls of individuals at very specific points in time. Doing so would enable them to finally conduct this great purge and finally create their perfect world. This plan required two things: an ancient book that contained invaluable information, and within it, they could determine the location of the summoning key. With the collective realization that MAXIS already knew where the Kronorium was located, they got to work. Incidentally, this is yet another piece of evidence for the human origin of Dr. Monty. If he was truly a keeper from birth, he would have likely known of its location and had the ability to reach it easily, since the keepers originally created it. Instead, he needs to discover its location. MAXIS contacted Primus Richtofen the following morning, informing him of the plan, but omitting Dr. Monty's involvement. From here, Richtofen proceeds to break time even more, having a lab constructed under Alcatraz with the assistance of the Illuminati. The rest of his journey occurs, and he eventually ends up with the Kronorium and the blood vials he requires. During this time, Monty and his allies were not the only ones busy. The Shadowman, Monty's old friend, turned a mercenary of the Apothecan Horde, set out putting his own plans into motion. In Morgue City, in Dimension 63, the Shadowman began corrupting the inhabitants slowly, first through their dreams and later through strange fungal spores that began to infect the minds of those they came into contact with. He knew that human members of the Order of the Keepers were keeping a powerful artifact here, one that would allow his Apothecan masters to enter the dimension and consume all. The summoning key. Through the manipulation and death of 4 sinners, he pulled them into a liminal version of the city, shifted slightly from its proper place, and used their blind trust to tear open the boundaries between their realm and the Dark Ether, as the tendency of the Keepers and the individuals within the realm resulted in his soul becoming trapped within the summoning key. Regardless, Richtofen arrived at the last minute and stole the summoning key, taking it with him and dooming Dimension 63 to destruction at the hands of the Apothecan overlords. Was this actually a misstep by the Shadowman though? I'm not so sure. During his time within the summoning key, which we know is an object that defies time itself, which you can see my video on the actual explanation for the KM44 Hypercube blueprint for more information, linked below, he makes contact with the Warden of Alcatraz and convinces him to create another liminal realm upon the island, using the souls of 4 other sinners. This creates a temporal loop within the realm and ultimately acts to ensnare Richtofen when he least expects it. It seems likely that he knew he was going to break out on Revelations, seeing as he says to Richtofen's soul Eddie from within the summoning key, "I'll be seeing you," unless that's a teaser for another day. Seeing as by this point the Kronorium released a year later than Revelations, so he already had that plot twist. Now, for the Shadowman to make this deduction, he has to know about the cycle that has just begun. This is likely likely the case as he has been active in the universe longer than Monty. When he engages in the manipulation of the Warden, he too is altering the timeline, once again fracturing it in a small way. The Kronorium has told Richtofen that he needs the blood vials, meaning it is in the future. For the blood vials to work, the Alcatraz pocket dimension needs to exist. For it to exist, the Shadow Man has to manipulate the Warden. For him to manipulate the Warden, he has to already be aware of the cycle, how it works, and Monty's lack of knowledge of it. Back to Richtofen. With the summoning key in tow, he proceeds to Dimension 2210 and recovers his own soul from a young, orphaned version of himself. The logic being that it was at a period whilst the soul was still innocent, before the Ether and Dark Ether had an opportunity to corrupt him. Primus Richtofen would later say on Tag the Totem, he knew the person he would grow up to be, and so had to do it. God knows what monster he was going to become. Eons later, this same soul would become Edward C. Richtofen, adopted son of Gabriel Kraft, long after the ultimate destruction of the Ether. It is somewhat alarming then that the Shadow Man spoke to the soul from within the summoning key, saying, "I'll be seeing you." Now that we're getting into souls, it's a good time to tackle a long-standing question. Just why does taking the souls of Ultimus also take Primus's souls too? Well, let's refer once again to Dr. Monty.
You know how people say that every snowflake is unique? That every single one is an individual, a one-of-a-kind, irrefutable evidence of the miracles of Mother Nature? Well, it's not true. Snowflakes aren't all that unique. There are really only about 12 different designs. The point I'm making is that you lot are hardly one-of-a-kind snowflakes. You were fragmented across a multitude of different realities, but each and every one is basically the same. You are all you. The liar, the braggart, the drunk. The one who didn't know what he had until it was gone. The good soldier. Never disobeyed orders, never broke protocol, still kicked ass all the same. The loyal servant. A warrior out of time, born too late or born too early. Honor-bound to dying traditions. The man-child, broken and twisted by a life burdened with knowledge. Living like a soul who is perpetually drowning.
Monty actually calls the characters snowflakes a few times, most notably during the Revelations ending.
Here's the funny thing. You snowflakes shouldn't even still be here. You should be fading out of existence by now.
He's not insulting them, saying they are special, quite the opposite. He calls them snowflakes because, like the real things, there may be slight variations between the different iterations of the characters, but they are also made of the same snow. Primus and Ultimus aren't different versions, they are the same beings, in the grand scheme of things, but they have been forcibly shattered between realities. This is why taking the soul of, say, Primus Takeo actually takes the soul of all Takeos across the multiverse. They are, or at least should be, the same single being. This is also why they have memories that bleed across space and time, which gets worse and worse as the cycles progress. They are all fractured, all the more, the longer this continues. Now the young soul of Edward was sent to Agatha, and Monty retrieved it, creating a new body alongside returning Samantha, her innocence now restored. Remember the first Zetsubou no Shima radio I played earlier in the video, where Maxis was recounting his time with Monty.
That was before he came. Samantha has been returned to me once more. As have you, Edward. As have you.
Pay special attention to the wording. Samantha has returned to me once more. Let's work backwards. This wording means that she has already been returned to him before. We know this to be the case. When Monty first appeared, he brought Samantha with him, who had been brought to and freed from Agatha in the chaos of the breaking of time at Origins. That was the first time she had been returned to Maxis, and for her to be returned, that means she went away, which again is totally consistent with what we see in the Chronicles Remember Forever video. The original Maxis, who shares memories with this one, brought her to Agatha, after which she sought to escape, so this all checks out. Monty brings Samantha back for a second time, now with the corruption removed, and along with her, Edward. Richthofen, arriving at Der Riese alongside Primus in 1945, fractures the original dimension when Primus Richthofen kills his 1.0 self, creating the Deceptio fracture. Why is this different from the major fractured dimensions like Dimension 63? Well, its creation is within the cycle. Therefore, it will be undone and occur once again every single time. It's the epicenter of the cycle, where it starts and ends. It's consistently always there, destroyed and born over and over. It has existed since the beginning, of which its excerpt is repeated in the timeline for Dimension 63 and the original dimension. Dimension 63 is a colossal fracture predating and contributing to its birthing itself, whereas the traditional fractures are created within, not before, the cycle, through securing the 1.0 characters' souls. I think that's what In the Beginning is referring to. The summoning key still does spawn the universe, filling them with life, but it does so by creating the universe that inevitably breaks with all of the events I described earlier colliding like the Big Bang, setting the cycle in motion. In the Beginning is just the TLDR for the actuality of what spawns everything. When we think of In the Beginning in the timeline and the summoning key creating the possibility for all life itself, we need to think of that initial smashing that birthed the universe. The summoning key is only ever said to make Agatha, but seeds the dimensions with life. It's never specified it created them themselves, so I think it just made the original dimension, which exploded into a multiverse. That was all of the time dilation effects of 115 smashing together. This is why 115 is the fabric of the multiverse, because it quite literally is its welding. Though progressively fracturing the dimensions, the original dimension diverges further and further from its intended history. After killing Takeo and creating the Agonia fracture, Primus briefly travel to the Alcatraz lab to acquire their blood vials. An insurance policy Richthofen believes will aid him and the rest of Primus in breaking this cycle, which, thanks to the Kronorium, he is aware he is within, and is really just further perpetuating it. The Agonia fracture possesses another interesting quirk. However, this is where Zero-Base MAXIS appears to originate from. As I said before, with the death of Richthofen at Der Riese, we know history changes. As a result, MAXIS almost certainly does not end up stuck in the computer systems of Griffin Station in the Predition fracture. The Sophia robot equally seems to imply he is not dead as most would perceive him to be.
MAXIS told me he had a plan. He said Broken Arrow showed him how to open up new worlds. It has been so long. I miss it.
Furthermore, this MAXIS seems to have had extensive contact with other realms.
Do you trust Richthofen? I do not trust Richthofen. Richthofen tried to kill my beloved MAXIS. Richthofen tried to kill Samantha. Do not trust him. He is an evil that must be extinguished.
This is consistent with the timeline we are given in the Kronorium of the Agonia fracture, as we know that interdimensional research with Daglok was aggressively pursued here. MAXIS during the course of Gorad Krovi, however, is nowhere to be seen. The most glaring piece of evidence is that in Zero Base, Sophia, as she appears in Gorad Krovi, is digitally connected across dimensions to it, yet is not there physically. Sophia is only made within the Agonia fracture, as per the timeline, and so it stands to reason that this is the MAXIS who discovered the empty Earth, recovered the Kronorium, and attempted to protect it from Monty's interference, knowing that those who serve him would end up without a soul. How would he know this, though? Well, there's no way to know for sure, we simply don't have the information, which is quite amazing considering we've been able to make decent educated guesses all the way up to this point. But here's my theory. The MAXIS lives his life past this date of his alleged death in the original timeline, unhampered by Richthofen's deliberate attempts to sabotage his research. As thanks to the Giant, he's no longer in the picture, and Groff gets taken out at the Eisendrache. MAXIS essentially gets to commandeer Group 935 as he wants. With this time, he likely began to query the goings-on on in the wider universe. We know from Classify that Monty somehow helped MAXIS at the start of this scientific journey, as he specifically engraved on the first MDT prototype by him to M, who started me on this journey, upon his teleporter prototype back in the original dimension. With this extra time, perhaps he began to wonder why M broke off contact. Furthermore, he may well have begun to experience the memories of other versions of himself, the Dimension 63 MAXIS, or even his variants from the original dimension who gained god-like power. With so much potential for forbidden knowledge, he may have understood the gravity of the cycle that reality now found itself within, even more so than Monty, and so set about with his own plan to right it, knowing that Richthofen, no matter the time period, would always fall to his own overconfidence. He may have gambled that Richthofen would follow the Kronorium to the letter, and that eventually someone would take advantage of that. As we learn from Blood of the Dead, this turned out to be the case. From here, Primus returned to the house with the souls, and fight the Apothecon Horde unleashed. They win, but not before the Apothecons have seeded yet more 115 into the future. Monty's plan is successful, and all 115 is erased from his perfect world and Agatha, but seemingly unknown to him, the 115 has been sent forward into the future, once again fracturing the timeline. With Primus now having drank the blood, they too will not simply fade away, but are paradoxical beings outside of his power. Genuinely concerned, Monty thinks of where he could possibly send them. Suddenly, he remembers the Great War, with its brave heroes, and understands now that it is all a cycle, and they were destined to go there from the start.
What to do? What to do? Well, you certainly can't stay here.
You could send us somewhere else. Somewhere we've never been.
I suppose I could make a little corner somewhere in history. A place where I can dump some of the other shit that I've left over, or I just wipe you from existence. Ooh, hang on! Actually, that all works out perfectly.
By the time we see the Revelations cutscene itself, I presume Monty was already aware of the cycle and he was playing dumb on purpose, but I believe in the initial cycle is where he truly put the pieces together. Finally, with some time to himself, Monty writes, thanks to the sacrifice of MAXIS and the contraption called Sophia, all the 115 has been purged from the final universe. Thank fucking God. Time to get some rest. M. Is this series of events perfect? No, definitely not. But as I've said, we unfortunately don't have access to all the information. Perhaps some of it is within the unsolved Revelation ciphers, but honestly I suspect these gaps are somewhat intentional, meant to be mysteries to let our imaginations run wild with. And that's what I've tried to do here. This big theory is really useful though, because what it does is explain one of the biggest gripes that I, and countless others, have had with the storyline. Monty's ignorance. When we take at face value that he is an eternal elder god just taking a human form to amuse himself, I guess, the amount of lapses in judgment he has seem laughable. He should know about the cycle intimately and know full well that Primus will be sent back at the end. And to a degree, this is true. MAXIS explores some of this in Alpha Omega, saying that Monty can't break the cycle without destroying Agatha, and so won't. He will just start over instead. But that on its own isn't satisfying. With this, however, we can argue that each cycle, a new Monty and Shadow Man arrive from their old mortal selves, replacing the currently existing version just like Samantha, or MAXIS, sharing some of the memories from their old selves, but being new all at once. Does that mean versions of John Dee and Edward Kelly even exist in the Dark Ether timeline? Who knows? Additionally, weird inconsistencies like Remember Forever's trailer now make sense too. Not only do we know why Sam disappears, but we can make a good guess and say this is occurring during the Buried/Origins time break. The snow is falling outside the window as existence itself is shattered. She sees through the worlds to the various places, now beginning to change. The 115 blue, things slightly different from where they ought to be. Even Ultimus were now in some of these places, where they hadn't been before. Finally, as the Origins quest is completed and Samantha is freed from Agatha, she vanishes, while the new Samantha, brought in an instant by the arrival of Monty, appears in the house. Thank you for watching. This video has been a monumental effort, taking weeks of meticulous combing over the timeline, trying to rectify all of the inconsistencies between the basic Dimension timelines and the Agatha timeline, which is nearly impossible as the Agatha timeline doesn't even have dates. Then with that done, we needed to try and work backwards from every single important event to determine what originally causes them, which is how we ended up with what we have. And we clearly looked at the timeline closer than anyone else, because it seems we've discovered a unique little Easter egg left by the developers. Just as Dr. Monty signed the timeline in-game canon, the out-of-game creators did too. Kronorium excerpt 102-3816-121016, a very long number, and after hours of staring at the image, it seemed almost out of place. Why was it such a big number? It's something I've been puzzled by for years. I always felt like it was holding a clue for something. Well, I have figured out exactly what. In the John D. Cipher solve, I discovered that Treyarch were fond of comparing numbers to letters and vice versa, which D was also fond of in real life. For example, that solve required us converting the letters A, E, the first, and fifth positions in the alphabet, aka 115. Well, it's the same case here, but in reverse. Instead, changing the numbers to letters in the excerpt reveals a hidden signature from 4 very proud Trek developers themselves. 10-2 in the alphabet is JB, aka the initials of Jason Blundell. 3-8 in the alphabet is CH, aka the initials of Craig Houston. 16-12 is PL in the alphabet, likely the initials of Peter Lamb. And finally, 10-16 is JP in the alphabet, likely the initials of Joseph Perlewski. And if you happen to be watching this video, I do apologize if I just butchered your last name there. It would seem that we know the real-life authors behind the monumental effort that is the Zombies timeline. Joseph is known publicly to have collated all of the dates, referenced offhandedly by Blundell in an interview and credited to him on his LinkedIn. Joseph has credits dating far back into Zombies history, initially working at Treyarch as a receptionist and climbing the ranks until he wrote most of the Black Ops 3 and 4 intel, collated the info for the timeline, directed Alpha Omega, and again wrote most of the intel for Cold War before leaving for DICE to help with Battlefield. Meanwhile, Peter Lamb is an artist at Treyarch who has an even longer history, being at Treyarch back in the Spider-Man days. According to information on his website, he drew the iconic death cards from World at War, as well as much of the concept art from them, being lead concept artist at Treyarch. It's hard to say exactly what his role is with the timeline, but I bet given his artistic skills and high position, he was responsible for getting the structure and a look of the image together, whereas the other 3 were involved in the actual writing process. Of course, Jason Blundell and Craig Houston don't need much of an introduction really, as they were the main pioneers of the story at the time, and their achievements with Zombies speak for themselves. Jason Blundell now heads up Dark Outlaw Games under Sony, and Craig Houston is still heading up the narrative department at Treyarch. Now, unlike the other Cipher solve, this one of course isn't anything crazy and is just a little developer nod, but a super neat find nevertheless. It's not hard to solve, the main trouble being just finding out who the developers are, really. And I think this is so crazy because it's so obviously there and we've just completely ignored it. And I think this is a good example of how things can be lying there dormant for years in plain sight and us, the community, just completely overlooks them. So it really makes me wonder how many other things are lying around in Zombies maps like this that aren't even that difficult to solve. The community's interest in Black Ops 3 has really reignited lately, and I'm sure over the coming months a lot more is going to be found. So I greatly hope that you have enjoyed this video. There will be many links in the description to my previous videos if you need any more context for the whole Impossible Easter Egg series as we go more in depth, for example in part 2 of that on the specific lives of John D and Edward Kelly, but this is my best attempt to piece together the initial timelines. So what's left for the Impossible Easter Egg series? Because this is kind of adjacent to it. It's mainly a storyline video, but it's sparked from the revelations of the Impossible Easter Egg. Well, I have a few ideas in mind. I have a few more leads I'm clued in on, so maybe they'll develop into something substantial, but they are not quite there yet. I do plan on doing a video drawing the parallels between Prospero from The Tempest and Monty's lives and perspectives. That was initially going to be a part of this video, but I felt like it was going to dilute it quite a bit, so I decided to focus it more on just the cycle itself. And I think it would be a good idea to re-examine the lyrics of, for example, Dead Ended, Dead Again, and many of the other Black Ops 3 Zombies songs and how they relate to Monty and even the Shadow Man now with this context in mind. For what's left to solve regarding the impossible Easter egg itself, like I explored in my solution video, there are likely, possibly, more messages contained within the D book's titles. Maybe some of them could even be keys for some of the Unsolved Revelation ciphers, but I ultimately think the Unsolved the Giant cipher, the Garod Cravia cipher, and the 10 Unsolved Revelation ciphers are where we should be focusing our main attention on right now, because I do feel like some of them could at least explain a lot of what I discussed more in depth here, but maybe they won't. Regardless, I'm sure at least some of them will be important. Anyways, thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not here for latest and greatest Call of Duty news and information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.